Welcome back into the Vandy Sports Podcast on the 440 Sports Network. I'm your host, Billy Derrick, alongside our football contributor, Will, a good friend, Will, and no Joey Dwyer today, but we're still talking football. Fall camp begins next week, July 31st. So we are quickly approaching no earlier start this year to fall camp because there's no week 0 game. I think most fans are excited about that. So normal setup for fall camp. I want to say every team has 28 days, I think, Will, for a 28 practice days. And, of course, at the beginning, you have the acclimation period with, you just helmets, a couple of days, and then you add the shells, the shoulder pads, and then you're able to start tackling and get going. So I will be there at fall camp for as many practices as I can. Joey and Chris will also be there most days as well. And then we'll have some podcasts reacting to what we see and some intel. So really looking forward to that. So this we'll probably have one more before fall camp starts. So kind of winding down the home stretch before fall camp. But let me get to some of the sponsors here. Anchor Impact, the Wash House, log on to washhouseclean.com. The Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, log on to mpmci.com. Sutherland and Belk, sbinjurylaw.com. Also, Maynard Nexen Government Contracts Group. Log on to their website. That's maynardnexen.com. All right, let's dive into some football stuff. We're going to go broad topic here. This probably won't be the longest episode, but, we were talking on the phone the other day, and, we thought, why not turn this into a podcast? Why not turn everything into what we said on the phone to each other, just talking about the year ahead, talking about how the schedule lines up, talking about all the differences between last year's team, last year's coaching staff, and this year's team, this year's coaching staff, all the new pieces that have come in. And so let's hop into it. And I think first off, I want to start with the coaching differences. And I want to kind of kick it to you. You've talked about your excitement for Robert Steiner and what he has done in the weight room with this football team. Also, Tim Beck and Jerry Kill. You've got a couple other New Mexico State coaches that have come over. The running backs coach, Ghali Muhammad Langford. You've got a couple other coaches as well in the secondary, former NFL coach, a former NFL secondary coach coming in as well. So a lot of new coaches, right? And I think that was the number one thing. Last year's team was not organized well enough. It was not well coached. You didn't see a football team that was executing at a high enough level. So for you, Will, what excites you most about the coaching staff in general and the changes that were made heading into this season? So we'll start there.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on here. Always excited to talk Vanderbilt football. Honestly, Billy, I'm excited across the board. Honestly, I'm excited about every single move we've made. At what happened last year wasn't working, right? It was an utter and complete failure. And they took the initiative, which a lot of Vanderbilt fans over the years would know that they wouldn't have hope they were going to take initiative. They were just going to go with the status quo and say, hey, we'll try it again. We'll run it back. We'll see if things go differently this time. Maybe it was just a fluke year. No, they took initiative. They were proactive, and they made several changes. They even made changes on some staff members you thought maybe could have stayed, right? Jaden Everett, the running backs coach, I thought he was, at least before the season, everybody was talking pretty highly of him as a coach. And they came in here and they said, hey, he might have been good, but we kind of want to go in a different direction, and we're going to move off of him. We're going to hire Muhammad from New Mexico State. And that's not something that would have happened in the past, Billy. Like, they would have never done something like that. He probably would have been here for 3 to 5 years, and as long as Clark was here, at least. And that was a good sign, in my opinion. Making a move 1 year after hiring him is not something you see at Vanderbilt very often, unless it's actually, absolutely catastrophic as far as performance. But Steiner, it's a toss-up, right? I don't know how you guys feel. You guys should comment below and tell us if you are more excited between these two coaches. But between Steiner and Kill, right, this is a toss-up for me. I honestly, Steiner has brought in a new philosophy, Billy, like just a complete different demeanor than what we had in the previous strength and conditioning staff. And I think that was desperately needed, especially after last year when you saw a lot of players were getting overmatched, oversized, looked fatigued later in the games, and then weren't able to finish strong. You're starting to see some positive, or you're seeing some positive feedback from the players and saying how much. Well,
Mm-hmm.
I saw somewhere that they said that the average lineman had gained like 17 pounds from the fall or winter
Mm.
camp to now, and like 12 pounds for like the defensive backs. So just think about that. How much muscle mass and how much weight they've gained in just 6, 7 months. That is that's a big deal. That is a really big deal. And we're gonna look big and jacked up and look like Georgia, well, maybe not look like Georgia, but closer to Georgia than Georgia State, right? We're gonna start looking the part. And that cannot be undersold on how important that is to this team, especially in
Mm-hmm.
football. And just hit on Jerry Kill. Jerry Kill is a team builder. He's won everywhere he's been. And I think you cannot undersell how important he is to this. And I think Clark might not have been ready for this job as a head coach because it's completely different than coordinating, Billy. But Jerry Kill can take him under his wing, show him the ropes, and hopefully it pays off.
Yeah, Kill. His nickname is Mr. Fix It in college football. I mean, he's been at Minnesota. He fixed that program, built that program up into a perennial bowl team, and even having some really good years, better than just 6-6. Right? He goes to New Mexico State, and who would have ever thought that you could turn New Mexico State into a 10-win, conference champ? And that's exactly what Jerry Kill did, and this is his 7th college football job since leaving Minnesota. Vanderbilt is obviously coming over from New Mexico State. I think a lot of people thought maybe his career is over. Maybe he's riding into the sunset. I think he had joked about having a margarita and moving to Florida. And why not move to Nashville? There's plenty of margaritas there, plenty of bars downtown. And I want to say his daughter is in town or either close to town. And so I think that was a big part of moving to Nashville for him. But, Minnesota and New Mexico State, are not known for football success, right? And so having the success that he did at those programs probably helps him here, right? He was an assistant also at Rutgers, Virginia Tech, TCU. So even those schools, he's never been at an Alabama, an LSU, a Texas, a Georgia, right? I think this fits him, being at Vanderbilt, but still in the SEC and having some chances on the road to maybe pick off a Missouri or a Kentucky or go to Auburn again and beat Auburn, right? I actually went back and watched that Auburn New Mexico State game, and I took some notes, and I do want to get into that maybe later in this podcast, Will. But I like what you said there about Kill, program builder. He's Mr. Fix It. So I think Jerry Kill is at the top of my list for coaches coming in and the impact they can have. Maybe not directly game day, on the field. He will be coaching on the field, which I think will help. But I just think throughout the week, right, weeks leading up to games, meeting with players and just pure motivation. I mean, he's an older guy, but a lot of those older guys can motivate players better than some of the younger guys. So number one, Jerry Kill's at the top of it for me. And then you have to go Steiner, I think. I think Beck and Kill are kind of interchangeable, right? You got Beck and then you got Kill. But I think Steiner, like you said, you cannot undersell that. I mean, they absolutely needed that. That costed them last year. The soft tissue injuries. And again, that's not all on what is his name? I'm forgetting Horgan. That's not that wasn't all on Horgan, right? I'm sure that's on other staffers and whoever. But there was not a level of health that you needed at Vanderbilt. And you point back to the training program. And so they changed the entire training program, right? Which they absolutely had to do. And for Clark to do that, not every coach, I think, would do that right away. I think that's something this offseason that I look at. Clark has admitted to his own faults, He said he's made mistakes. The staff has made mistakes. Players have made mistakes, but he's corrected those and he's made the right moves. So obviously Steiner, and I'm really interested. That's what I'm most excited about for fall camp, to see how much bigger is Wataha. Darren Agu, how much bigger does he look? Even some of the receivers and younger DBs like a Martell Hyde or a Trudell Berry, right? Because those guys, you gotta get bigger every offseason, but especially at Vanderbilt, that has to be re-emphasized every day, every workout, right? So obviously Steiner, and then Tim Beck, of course. We've talked a lot about the offensive approach coming into this season, I think, in the last couple of podcasts, and what to expect. We let off our side of the ball preview with the offense, and I just think with Tim Beck, this is the right offense for where Vanderbilt is right now. No, this is not a number one. The quarterback's changed, so you don't have an AJ Swan or a Ken Seals back there who are pass first quarterbacks. You've got Pavia and Nate Johnson back there who are both run first quarterbacks. Tim Beck, the quarterbacks he's coached, Lamar Jackson, Colin Kaepernick, in that heavy run scheme. But let's not forget, he likes to throw the ball around as well. I mean, you watch the tape, throw the tape on in New Mexico State. Very creative with some of their pass schemes and using the run to set up that pass. So, Will, I don't think we've talked about, maybe some of the defensive coaches as much. Melvin Rice coming over from New Mexico State, who is, the new safeties coach. You've also got Chris Klanakis on the offensive line, which will pair very well with that Tim Beck offense. Steve Gregory was the guy I was talking about coming over from the NFL. He's the associate defensive coordinator. I think he'll play a pretty big role. Garrett Altman coming over from New Mexico State as well. So a lot of new coaches here. Like we've talked about, some new titles. Jeff Lepak is the special teams coordinator. But either way, Will, these coaching changes had to happen. We know what's more important is the talent they're bringing in. But no matter how much talent you have, if you don't have the right coaches to coach them, you're going to fail as a program.
Yeah, and I think one thing that Clark's doing that's the right approach is he's kind of taking the Kirby Smart approach with him just taking over the defense. Yep. He had complete say over it. He's the head coach of defense, and he said, I need to go out there. I need to hire an offensive head coach, a guy I can just hand the keys over to, has complete control of the offense, and can take this thing to new heights and consistencies that we haven't seen in the Clark Lea era. And that is honestly the way to do it, Billy. I think Tim Beck and Jerry Kill have over, I think it's like 70 or 80 years combined of coaching experience and on the offensive side of the ball. Now, they're not dinosaurs or anything. They're not like, oh my God, this is like, a caveman football, scheme. But they have a lot of experience. And that's one thing that Clark desperately needed, especially when you look at his previous staff members. I think that's one thing they lacked was a lot of like high level experience. Joey Lynch and, Nick Howell coached at BYU before they were a Power 5 school, and he coached at Virginia, but that's not really a good example of success, I guess. But Joey Lynch never coached in the offense in the Power 5 level ever, so that he never had been at this experience. But Jerry Kill has, and Tim Beck hasn't either. But Tim Beck has had success at stints that were just like, well, that guy deserves a chance to coach the next level, right? What he did at New Mexico State cannot be undersold. It was very impressive. Winning 10 games at New Mexico State is like winning 10 games at Vanderbilt. It doesn't happen, right? It does not happen. I think they're actually bottom 3 most losing or teams with the most losses in college football, if I'm not mistaken. They're historically losers. Yeah. They don't win. I think they've only made a handful of bowl games in their career or through their life as a school. And so that's going to be nice to kind of have someone translate that's done something like that, Billy. And, you talked about the defensive side of the ball, right? This is Clark's bread and butter. He is a defensive genius, is what people say. That he was a top 3 to top 5 defensive coordinator when he was at Notre Dame through 2018 to 2020, made it to two college football playoff appearances. And that was when they had 4 teams, not 12. And he made it to 2. And I think you got to give Clark Lea a lot of credit to Notre Dame making those 2 appearances, right? So that's going to be nice to see what Clark can do. Clark Lea, biggest upgrade in the history of Vanderbilt sports when it comes to going from Nick Howell to him on the defensive side of the ball. I don't even know if that's debatable. It's the biggest upgrade that this football team has made since I've been watching in quality, right? So that's going to be interesting to see what happens. And Billy, let's get into this, right? Because this is one thing that I was really passionate about. Um, I was very skeptical about Diego Pavia when the chatter started to come around about him possibly coming here. I'm like,
Yeah,
man,
same.
I don't know if I want all these New Mexico State players, not because they're bad, but they're a certain level of good, right? I don't know if you take New Mexico State's whole team and you move it over to the SEC, they're not going to probably do very well, right? They have limitations. But the more I find out about him, and see what he's done and see what he's made of, Billy. See what he is made of as a player. The drive, the demeanor, the we're going to win, right? That's infectious. That's what you want in the locker room. You don't want a guy who's a mouse and doesn't say anything. You want these guys believing, man, that they can do it. And we'll get more into Diego Pavia, but I'm just going to leave one quote that really got me fired up. I was talking with a buddy, and he was saying that Diego Pavia has been saying all around the locker room that we are going to beat Virginia Tech. He's been saying that. He's not saying, hey, we can. He's saying we will. We are going to beat Virginia Tech week 1. It's going to happen. He said, I've always went bowling, and I'm not stopping this year.
Hey, I just want you – our board's going to be blaming you if this doesn't come to fruition. But, no, well, there's something to be said for that, and we can go ahead and shift into the player side of it. And yeah, Clark Lea taking over the defense. We have chronicled that a lot. And that was a big piece of discussion at SEC Media Days, and a lot of people, we were able to talk to, at least for the Plaster Show, like that was the big talking point. Like Clark taking over the defense is huge. Now, does it make a ton of difference in the one column at the end of the day? We'll see. Either way, how this defense plays, how they look, how active they are, how much more organized it is going to be a big difference. Like Clark is one of those coaches, whether he's coaching Vanderbilt, TCU, Eastern Washington, or Notre Dame, the defense he's coaching is going to play well, right? And no matter what talent he has. Now, we'll see. And we've got some pieces. Especially, at that linebacker position and up the middle in the secondary. But we've chronicled that. I do want to keep that Pavia thing going, keep the Pavia train rolling. I went back and watched the New Mexico State-Auburn game finally. Just watched New Mexico State's offensive possessions. And obviously Pavia stood out. And rewatching that, you realize just how tough he is and how he stands in there, makes throws. He's pretty accurate too. I mean, I noticed in that game specifically, I didn't watch a ton of their other games last year. I'm going to try to go back and watch, but he was pretty accurate, specifically in that Auburn game. A lot of RPOs, speed option stuff. They gave you a ton of different looks. So much misdirection too that Auburn just was lost, and that wasn't a bad Auburn defense last year. They weren't necessarily, I wouldn't say there was a great Auburn defense, but I mean, that was a middle of the pack SEC defense that had some talent. But New Mexico State they were a physical team that played hard, and Pavia led the way. He was such a big part of that. But he was smart too, man. Like it's not like he, and reckless at times, right? I mean, you watch some of his highlights, and obviously he threw a pick in this game. It ended up ending on a suplex from him from that Auburn DB that like we've talked about, but. I watched several plays where blitzes are coming. He throws right where the blitz came from, drops back, and calmly makes the throw. I mean, he's a smart player. And like I said, he's more accurate than I thought. He made throws, Will, that you don't coach, right? Whether he's running to his left or to his right, a little bit of Johnny football, let's hold our horses a little bit there. But you get a feel of that, right? Where he gets out of the pocket, stays behind the line of scrimmage, and maybe throws across his body or throws on the run. You don't coach that, right? So I think, again, we know about his athleticism. He's shifty. And what kept coming back to me, Will, was how ahead of Auburn's defense he was. Like I said, they would blitz and boom, he sees it. He tosses it right up over the linebacker's, outstretched arm in the red zone. There was one play, and I want to put some of these clips out, but his anticipation really stood out to me. And I think in the SEC, Will, you've got to have that. This offensive line at Vanderbilt is going to be better this year. We talked about some of the additions with Hubbard and Mitchell. You've got Lasoya back there. You've got Grayson Morgan and Hanson. And you even got a couple of guys behind those guys. But you still have to be able to find ways to move the football, right? You're not Georgia. You're not Texas. You're not Alabama. You're not going to maul people. Now, I think if you get creative enough, especially with some bigger running backs they brought in from New Mexico State, McKylan Young, he was a big physical breakaway type back in that game, specifically against Auburn. Same with Jamani Jones. I still think Alexander and Newberry are probably the top two dogs in that running back room, but to have Young and Jones back there as well, who know the offense, are bigger type backs, probably primary blockers, 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3, maybe they get the ball. But I look at Pavia, Will, in his anticipation. Last year with A.J. Swan and even Ken Seals, there wasn't enough off-schedule creativity, dynamic playmaking ability, right? And that's not the type of quarterbacks they were, right? It's nothing against them. That's not how that offense was built. This offense is more built upon Diego Pavia's skill set. Well, I wonder why. The entire New Mexico State offensive staff is there, right? You've got Stowers and a few running backs, but it's built around what he can do. And now that he is here, right? He's been on campus for the last couple of months. Now that he is here, I'm sure they've even started to build it around him a little bit more. Don't want to forget about Nate Johnson, but Pavia, with his experience, Will, it's going to be an X factor in one way or the other.
Yeah, and another thing too, Billy, you were talking about Diego Pavia's off-script plays and just how he was able to improvise, which you cannot, that's something you can't always underestimate how important that can be, especially at Vanderbilt. Like when the offensive line, the protection breaks down and they have to make a play. But the quarterbacks the last couple years, it seems like all of them have been a step behind a decision, and it seems like Pavia is a step ahead. And I think that can make a huge difference in the win column, right? And thinking about some of the quarterbacks from the past, right? I'm gonna throw some names out here. Hopefully, we've got some long committed Vanderbilt fans. This is going to be a ring from the past. But you look at like Jordan Rodgers, right? In 2011 to 2012, this is someone similar talent-wise. Maybe Pavia is even a little better. Jordan Rodgers, kind of gained some momentum in 2011 and James Franklin's first year, won the starting job towards the end of the season, carried that into 2012, right? Billy, Jordan Rodgers is not Aaron Rodgers. He doesn't have the biggest arm. He's not the fastest quarterback. He's not the smartest player on the field, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he was in a rhythm where he was a top 3, top 4 SEC quarterback at the end of that season, man. I mean, I honestly felt at that in 2012, we could beat anybody or could play with anybody. We just had this confidence about us, right? And then it carries over to next year. Austin Carter Samuels was the starting quarterback. Austin Carter Samuels was okay, but the team improved, right? From the 2012, 2013, all the recruits, the talent around the team had improved significantly. I think Pavia is better than both of those quarterbacks, Billy. I think he's better than both quarterbacks. You heard me, better than both quarterbacks. And it's in the proof of what he's able to do. I mean, he had like 2,700 passing yards, 26 touchdowns, almost 1,000 rushing yards last year, something along those lines. And he knows the system. He is a Tim Beck enthusiast, a professor, a maestro, right? He knows how to do this system. And he just has that name. I told you this other day, right? We're in a decade as fans. Hopefully we look back and we say, hey, you remember that year that Diego Pavia played for Vandy and we beat Tennessee? Like, it just kind of sounds like that is possible. Like, that's the name. You hear these names. It's like, yeah, that guy he was here for 1 year, but he was a Vanderbilt legend, right? I mean, that guy, you just knew when that guy walked on campus, he meant business. Like he was going to do something special here. And you brought this up earlier, right? You watched the highlights, the tape. New Mexico State beat the brakes off of Auburn this past year. I
Mhm.
want to say it was 34-10, if I'm not mistaken, or somewhere
Yeah,
around there.
30, 31. Yeah, I think it was 34-10. Yeah.
34-10. Okay. And how bad did we lose to Auburn this year?
Just as bad, if not worse than that.
Yeah. It was, I can't remember. Was that a home game for us or an away game?
Last year that was a home game.
Okay. So I want
Yeah,
everybody to
lost
keep
31-15. Lost last year to Auburn.
So New Mexico State went to Auburn, beat the brakes off them 34-10. Auburn came to us and we lost, honestly, pretty embarrassingly, right? It wasn't really, never felt close. So you look at that demeanor and like what he was able to do against an SEC team with Conference USA talent. If I'm not mistaken, that's what Conference New Mexico State is in. And he's going to have more talent around him than he had at New Mexico State, right? You got Fungi, you got Cheryl, you've got Skinner. You know, there's a lot of talent, right? We don't have to go through all the names, but there's a lot of good players on this team, and he's in the same system. And I just think I was going to mention Nate Johnson. We don't know for sure who the starting quarterback is going to be. It's not been officially announced, but we all pretty much presume it's going to be Nate. It's going to be Diego Pavia over Nate Johnson, and Nate Johnson will probably take the reins next season after he gets a year in the system. But Billy, I just feel like you got to have that X factor player who can lead this team to wins. And you said that Vanderbilt's not Georgia. Completely agree. Nobody in their right mind would believe that. But you know who Diego Pavia reminds me of a little bit? A short quarterback, older veteran, X factor quarterback, made some great plays off script for Georgia. 5'11",
Stetson Bennett.
walk on player, quarterback for Georgia, transferred and came back. That worked out pretty well for Georgia, Billy, didn't he?
He did. He did.
How many national championships did they win together?
2.
Now, I'm not saying we're going to win a national championship. I'm just saying, look at what a quarterback like that can do for your team, right?
Yeah.
Now, obviously, he had some very good weapons, right? He had Lad McConkey. He had Brock Bowers. He had George Pickens, I think, for a season. But I'm just saying, though, that there are a lot of similarities. And Vanderbilt's national championship this year would be a 6-6 season and go into a bowl game, right? And I think you, me, and Joe are going to do a prediction show down the line about our season or what we think the record's going to be. But I think that 6-6 is very obtainable with this team, with Diego Pavia leading the charge. That's just how I feel. And I know when we talked on the phone the other day and I told you this, I got you fired up. And I just wanted to relay that. I just wanted to try to carry that energy over, make a case to you guys.
Yeah. I mean, look, the more you learn about Pavia and what he's made of, how he's built, his background, his toughness, he's a gamer. He's a gamer, and you have to have that at the quarterback position, especially at Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's 2 best quarterbacks in school history are 2 pocket passers, Kyle Shermer and Jay Cutler, right? So, that kind of tells you even the really good quarterbacks at Vanderbilt were more pocket passers, but the ones in the James Franklin era that got Vanderbilt to 9 wins back-to-back years, Austin Carter-Samuels, Jordan Rogers, Patton Robinette. I mean, they never had a drop-back pocket passer because James Franklin knew those types of quarterbacks is exactly what they needed. They wanted to establish the run. They were a tough, physical offense. They weren't Franklin, that's the thing people forget. Franklin never had these flashy offenses. You had a really good receiver in Jordan Matthews, right? Especially Jonathan Krause as well. But
Chris Boyd.
Chris Boyd, the quarterbacks were so important to those teams because they could run the football. They could create. But they made plays. They were smart. You have to that's what Pavia is. Now, again, we've got to wait and see what happens, but I just want to get people prepared like you are trying to do, Will, of what you're going to see from Pavia. Now, the big thing for me is the adjustment from playing in Conference USA. I know he went to Auburn and beat Auburn, and that's obviously a great sign. And maybe this is null and void. Maybe this ultimately doesn't matter. But just the wear and tear, the grind of, you look at Vandy's schedule at Mizzou, Alabama at home, at Kentucky. You get Ball State in between, Texas, Auburn, South Carolina, LSU, Tennessee. Like, by the beginning of November, how's Pavia feeling? Is he healthy? Right. So that's what I'm looking at, because last year, New Mexico State, you're playing New Mexico. I don't even know who else is on their Conference USA schedule, but it's not
Liberty.
the SEC,
Yeah,
right?
it's not.
Liberty, yeah. Not an awful conference, but obviously not the SEC. So that's what I'm looking for, Will. Specifically with Pavia. Just, can you hold up? Can your body hold up? But at the end of the day, he does remind me a little bit of Austin Carter-Samuels, and I think he has obviously even more potential than Austin Carter-Samuels. Tough, smart, dependable, not the most flashy, not the sexiest quarterback, not the biggest quarterback, right? Maybe not even the fastest quarterback, but just creative and smart and executes, takes care of the football and possesses the football, controls the clock, right? That's what I noticed, well, from that Auburn game as well with New Mexico State, going back to that Tim Beck and Derrick Will offense. They controlled the clock. They dominated time of possession in that game. They would get to a 3rd and 6, and boom, Pavia makes a play, scrambles, gets the first down. And then Eli Stowers in the red zone he had every red zone Wildcat snap. They went to Wildcat with Eli Stowers and a couple of those bruiser running backs and just pounded Auburn away. It was pretty incredible to watch. I'm very interested to see, are we going to be able at the end of the season to turn on that last year's New Mexico State tape, that Auburn game, maybe some of the other games, and say, man, that's exactly what Vanderbilt looked like this year? Are we going to be able to say that is one of my big questions as well, because you've got Jerry Kill, you've got Tim Beck, Pavia, Stowers, a couple of running backs, right? It should look pretty similar, right? Now, you don't have the same setup as you did at New Mexico State, right? Clark is running the defense, but with Kill, a lot of his focus is going to be on the offense. Will you'd have to imagine. So that's one of my big questions.
Well, also too, Billy, I don't want to go too far into the weeds about it because, like I said, me, you, and Joey are going to have a official predictions show about what we think is going to happen. But
yep,
anybody who's watched the Clark Lea era, they know the 2-10 season was abysmal, right? But that was because they didn't have a real recruiting class. They had Mason's recruits and they just kept them, and they didn't, like, Clark didn't recruit a single player that year. And then they had a lot of people who had left during, that was like the COVID exodus, where so many people left and they didn't, it was just, we were depleted. 2022 that's when you started to have the Clark Lea recruits start to trickle in, and a little bit of more, the familiarity with him, and went 5-7, Billy, with a quarterback shuffle between Mike Wright and AJ Swan, and I think Ken Seals even started a game, if I'm not mistaken, maybe in 2022. Maybe he didn't, but AJ Swan and Mike Wright there was a quarterback shuffle between the two. Yeah. They went 5-7. Now, last year was disastrous because I think they were trying to play a system that doesn't work with the team that they had, and there's a lot of factors, right? But I'll tell Vanderbilt fans this, right, including you: if we were going to make a bowl game this year, we did everything we realistically could do. Okay, I'm not talking about get 10 5-star recruits or all these 4 stars and $30 million in NIL money. I'm talking about what Vanderbilt can realistically do. They've done everything they could do this offseason, change-wise, player acquisition-wise, NIL money-wise, to make a bowl game this year. And if they don't make a bowl game this year, something catastrophic must have happened. I don't know what it is. You can speculate, but something catastrophic must have happened if they don't make a bowl game this year with everything they've done.
There you heard it from Will. Vandy in a bowl game potentially. Okay, last question before we wrap it up, Will. And again, we're gonna have plenty of content coming here before fall camp. Probably have one more after this. We'll get Joey in here, and I don't think we'll do that season predictions yet. We'll probably do that a little bit closer to the season. But we will have one more episode dedicated to kind of a fall camp preview and what to watch for in fall camp. But here's what to watch for now, Will. This defense as well, with Clark Lea, Langston Patterson, CJ Taylor. How much better can this defense be this season? Because I look at it, and number one, you got to stay healthy. Obviously, that's the most important part. But we talked about it earlier. How much better and how much more of a unit will this defense look like under Clark Lea as opposed to under Nick Howell? I personally think it can be a pretty big difference just aesthetically, right? You're watching Vanderbilt's defense, and there's not gaping holes every other run play. When you're playing against Florida and Gainesville, right? I mean, that was so many games, even South Carolina, where this defense wasn't ready. They didn't look like they were in the right spots and didn't look like they were being coached well enough. The UNLV game in particular, that's when it really reared its ugly head, whether it was the last play with Martell Hyde or the timeout, right? One of the coaches telling CJ Taylor to call a timeout. Like, this defense should be so much more organized. And they've added some pieces. You've added Dante Carter. You've added Randon Fontenette. But to me, Will, that defensive line still has to step up and finally cause some havoc, right? That in the Franklin era, that's what you got a little bit. You saw some Kyle Westman, Adam Butler, right? Those guys, they were causing havoc. Yeah, I mean, you had some dudes there, and even under Mason Odangbo, like, that hasn't happened under Clark Lea yet. I'm really intrigued to see that front seven, for specifically the defensive line, get pressure on the quarterback, because I think that's, again, we talk about question of the podcast, differences between last year and this year. A big difference should be that defensive line. I'm not saying it will be, but if this team does make a bowl game, sounds like you're going to predict, that defensive line is going to have to create some havoc, more havoc than they have. We know what the middle of the defense will be with Patterson, Colley, Taylor at safety. But overall, I'm really intrigued. And I think that is going to be one of the bigger differences between last year and this year, Will, just how it looks. And as a fan, you're not sitting there just depressed watching your defense, right? You can feel confident, and you have a little bit of hope, and okay, our defense can create some havoc and cause some turnovers.
Yeah, and I'm kind of just going back to the memory bank, thinking about some performances in the Clark Lea era defensively that stands out. And go back to the Kentucky game, right? When Will Levis was the quarterback in 2022. I think the final score was 24-21, the game we won. That's the kind of performance I'm thinking we're going to have, Billy. We can't give up more than 20 to 21 points, I would say, in order to have a chance. I don't think Vanderbilt's going to hold an SEC opponent to 10 points or 14 points or 17 points, at least consistently, right? But they can't be giving up 30, 40, 50 points. They have to try to stop the bleeding. And I look at that performance, and then I look at the Florida performance. The Florida performance was actually pretty good until the second half, when the wheels kind of fell off and Anthony Richardson started to cook the team. But that's the type of performance you have to have. You just have to be organized, bend but don't break. And I think Clark is going to have a better structure than what Nick Howell had with Vanderbilt. Jesse Minter was kind of like a blur, because of how quickly he came in and went out. But I remember the defense played pretty well, Billy, especially with the talent deficiency they had. And I think that from everything I've heard and talked to people, that we're going to see more of Jesse Minter style than Nick Howell is defensive coordinator from Clark Lea. We talked about this earlier. He was a top 3 to top 5 defensive coordinator when he was at Notre Dame. And this team has talent. It's not like he's having to get a bunch of Joes and try to make them something they're not. There's plenty of talent on this team. I can't wait to see what Langston Patterson develops under Clark Lea and all the blitz packages, and to see what he really does this season, or Darren Agu, or Utaha, or even Devin Lee, right? See what he can do this year. Because I think he showed a lot of flash in 2022. Just, I really think, Billy, a lot of the defensive line and offensive line deficiencies last year were strength issues with the strength conditioning program. I think with that change, because that's the biggest guys on your team. They have to be the big brutes, right? They have to be the biggest guys coming off the bus. I think that's going to make a difference, man. And I can't wait. It's going to be exciting. The like most intriguing thing for me is it's not just going to be one side. We're going to be like, oh, hey, Will, Clark Lea's going to do defensive coordinator. I can't wait to see what he does. The whole thing is new. Every coordinator is new. Every coordinator is new. Even special teams is new. So it's like almost we hired a new coach and a new coaching staff. It's almost like resetting the button. So I'm excited to see everything. It feels like there's hope in the air.
Well, that hope will begin July when fall camp gets underway, and then just a month later, August 31st, Virginia Tech rolls into Nashville for an 11 a.m. kickoff on ESPN right after College Game Day. So get football season. It feels like it's more and more every day. Will, it's here. I know we've got some listeners that have played the new college football game and played with Vanderbilt and gotten a nice look at the stadium and the new stadium, what that finished product will look like. Well, this needs to be more of a finished product this year, at least closer to that finished product, just like the stadium. But thank you for listening. For Will, I'm Billy. That's been another episode of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Give our podcast review a 5-star rating. It helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to vandysports.com yet, please do. It's $99 a year, $9.99 a month. It helps us tremendously. Also, go subscribe to our vandysports.com YouTube channel. Again, for Will, I'm Billy. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the Vandy Sports Podcast.